My family only called when they needed something. The last time my family called me important, they were really talking about my bank account. It took me 38 years to understand that difference. Growing up, I was the dependable daughter, the one who solved problems, paid bills when emergencies happened, and showed up every single time someone else disappeared. My older brother was celebrated for his confidence. My younger sister was protected because she was too sensitive, and I quietly became the person everyone expected to fix whatever fell apart. At first, I believed that was what families did for one another. Later, I realized I was the only one living by those rules. The phone rang on a rainy Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing contracts in my office. My mother's voice sounded unusually warm. She asked about my health, my work, even whether I was sleeping enough. She hadn't asked questions like that in years. Before I could enjoy the conversation, she reached the real reason for calling. My grandfather's lakefront property had finally been transferred after months of legal delays, and the entire family was gathering that Saturday to celebrate together. She said everyone wanted me there because families should stand united during important moments. The invitation sounded kind, almost too kind. Experience had taught me that kindness arriving without warning usually came attached to paperwork. After ending the call, I opened the family group chat for the first time in months. Suddenly everyone seemed excited to see me. My brother sent cheerful messages. My sister added heart emojis. Even cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years were asking what dessert I wanted. None of it felt natural. Families don't transform overnight. People do that only when they believe you have something they need. Saturday arrived with bright sunshine reflecting across the lake. The house looked exactly as it had during childhood birthdays, but the atmosphere felt different. Conversations stopped for a split second when I walked through the front door. Smiles appeared a little too quickly. My brother immediately offered me coffee. My sister insisted I take the best seat in the living room. My mother hugged me longer than she had in years. Every gesture felt rehearsed, as though everyone had memorized the same script before I arrived. Then my uncle walked in carrying a thick leather folder, placed it carefully on the dining table, and smiled. "Before lunch," he said, "there's one small family matter we should settle." The moment that folder opened, I realized I hadn't been invited because I was loved. I had been invited because someone expected me to sign away something they had already decided belonged to them. The document they'd already signed for me. Some betrayals don't begin with an argument. They begin with a smile and an empty line waiting for your signature. My uncle rested the leather folder in the center of the table, like he was presenting a birthday gift. Everyone watched him with quiet confidence. No one seemed nervous. That was the first warning. People only look that comfortable when they believe the outcome has already been decided. He cleared his throat and explained that Grandpa's lakefront property had become too valuable for one person to manage. Instead of allowing the house to remain under my name, as Grandpa's will clearly stated, the family had prepared what they called a fair family ownership agreement. According to the document, ownership would be divided equally among my mother, my brother, my sister, and me. They spoke about unity, fairness, and honoring Grandpa's memory. The words sounded thoughtful, but every sentence carefully avoided one inconvenient fact. Grandpa had chosen only one name for that deed, mine. My brother leaned back in his chair with the confidence of someone expecting an easy victory. "Nobody wants to take anything from you," he said with a reassuring smile. "We're just making sure the house stays in the family forever." My sister nodded immediately, adding that shared ownership would prevent future disagreements. Even my mother reached across the table and gently squeezed my hand. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "your grandfather trusted you because he knew you'd always do the right thing." I almost smiled at the irony. For years, every difficult responsibility had somehow become the right thing for me to carry, while everyone else conveniently shared only the rewards. I asked one simple question. "Who wrote this agreement?" The room went unusually quiet. My uncle admitted a family attorney had prepared everything weeks earlier. Weeks earlier. Before anyone had even invited me to lunch. Before anyone had asked what I wanted. Before anyone had spoken to me at all. The decision hadn't been waiting for my opinion. It had been waiting for my signature. I closed the folder without reading another page, and calmly placed it back in front of my uncle. Years of negotiating contracts had taught me something my family never understood. The most dangerous documents are often wrapped in the kindest words. I thanked everyone for inviting me, and said I'd have my attorney review every page before making any decision. The smiles around the table disappeared almost instantly. What happened next proved they had never invited me to discuss the agreement. They had invited me because they believed saying no would never even cross my mind. They thought guilt would do what the law couldn't. People who can't force your signature usually try to force your emotions instead. ***, I had barely reached my car before my phone began vibrating. First my brother called. Then my sister. Then 2 cousins I hadn't spoken to in almost a year. By sunset, I had 12 missed calls and more messages than I'd received in the previous 6 months combined. Every single one carried the same message wrapped in different words. Don't make this difficult. Grandpa would want peace. We're only asking you to be fair. Not one person asked why Grandpa had chosen me in the first place. They weren't interested in his decision. They were interested in changing it. Monday morning, I met with my attorney Daniel Brooks, a man who had spent nearly 30 years handling estate disputes. He read the agreement from beginning to end without saying a word. When he finally placed the papers back on his desk, he looked at me over the rim of his glasses. Legally, he said, you have absolutely no obligation to sign this. He explained that Grandpa's will had been drafted carefully, witnessed correctly, and challenged by no one during probate. Ownership had already transferred. Unless I voluntarily surrendered part of it, the property belonged entirely to me. Then he said something that stayed with me long after I left his office. Whenever someone says, it's not about the money, make sure the paperwork matches the speech. Those words echoed in my mind all the way home. That evening my mother appeared at my front door carrying a homemade apple pie. She smiled the same way she used to when I was a child, hoping old memories would soften new decisions. We sat in the kitchen, talking about Grandpa, childhood summers at the lake, and family holidays that felt much happier than the reality I remembered. For a brief moment, I thought she had come simply to reconnect. Then she reached into her purse and quietly placed another copy of the agreement on my table. If you sign tonight, she whispered, everyone could finally move on. I looked at the untouched pie, then at the papers lying beside it. The dessert hadn't been the reason for the visit. It was only the delivery method. I slid the agreement back toward her without opening it. Mom, I said calmly, if Grandpa wanted 4 owners, he would have written 4 names. Her smile faded. For the first time since this began, neither of us pretended the conversation was about family anymore. She left without the pie, and less than 24 hours later, I discovered my family had already taken another step behind my back. One that could have cost me everything if I hadn't caught it in time. The secret they never meant for me to find. The biggest mistake dishonest people make is assuming you'll never verify what they're telling you. The morning after my mother left, I decided to stop reacting emotionally and start asking questions. My grandfather had trusted me for a reason, and I owed it to him to understand exactly why. Instead of driving to my office, I stopped at the county records building. I wasn't looking for a fight. I was looking for facts. The clerk retrieved the property file within minutes. Everything matched my attorney's explanation. The deed, the probate documents, and Grandpa's final instructions were perfectly clear. There wasn't a single legal mistake for anyone to exploit. But just as I was preparing to leave, the clerk mentioned something almost casually. Your uncle requested copies of these records 3 weeks before the estate officially closed. I paused. 3 weeks before. Long before anyone invited me to that so-called family celebration. They hadn't gathered to discuss Grandpa's wishes. They had gathered because they'd already learned they couldn't change them through the court. That afternoon I visited the lake house alone. The place looked exactly as it had during childhood summers. The old wooden dock stretched across the quiet water. Grandpa's fishing chair still sat beside the porch, weathered but untouched. Walking through the empty rooms, memories returned one after another. Every cracked floorboard, every family photograph, every handwritten measurement on the kitchen doorway where Grandpa tracked our height as children. Then, while organizing a few boxes in his study, I found something unexpected. Hidden beneath an old photo album was a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a short handwritten letter. Asterisk, if you're reading this, it means the house is finally yours. I know there may be pressure to divide it. Before you make any decision, remember why I chose you. You never measured this place by its price. You measured it by its memories. Protect both. I read those lines 3 times before carefully folding the letter and placing it back inside the envelope. Driving home, everything finally made sense. Grandpa hadn't left me the property because I was the oldest, the richest, or the most successful. He left it to the one person he believed would preserve what mattered most. My family saw a valuable asset. Grandpa saw a responsibility. Those were 2 very different things. When I reached my driveway, my phone buzzed with a new message from my brother. It contained only one sentence. Don't make us do this the hard way. For the first time since this all began, I wasn't wondering what my next move would be. I was wondering exactly how far my own family was willing to go. Because that message wasn't a request anymore. It was a warning. The first lie finally cracked. Threats only work when the other person believes you're afraid. Asterisk, asterisk, I stared at my brother's message for several seconds before locking my phone and setting it face down on the kitchen counter. Years ago, those words would have kept me awake all night. I would have questioned myself, replayed every conversation, and wondered whether I was being unreasonable. But something had changed. Grandpa's letter hadn't just explained why he trusted me. It reminded me that protecting something valuable sometimes meant disappointing the people trying to take it. Fear disappeared the moment I realized I wasn't defending a piece of property. I was defending the last promise I had made to someone who believed in me. The next morning, my assistant informed me that my brother was waiting in the reception area. He hadn't called ahead. He hadn't asked for an appointment. He simply walked in as though my office belonged to him. When I invited him inside, he didn't waste time with small talk. He placed a glossy brochure on my desk showing architectural renderings of luxury waterfront homes. This is the future of the lake, he said confidently. A developer is ready to buy the entire shoreline. They're offering more money than this family has ever seen. I flipped through the pages in silence. Beautiful houses, private docks, exclusive community. Then I noticed something unusual. Every rendering included Grandpa's property as the centerpiece of the project. They can't move forward without your signature, my brother admitted. That's why everyone needs you to cooperate. There it was, the truth hiding beneath weeks of speeches about family unity. This had never been about preserving Grandpa's legacy. It had always been about closing a business deal. I looked up calmly. How long have you known about this developer? His confidence disappeared for the first time. A few months, he answered carefully. A few months. Long before Grandpa's estate was finalized. Long before my mother invited me to that family dinner. Long before anyone spoke about fairness. Suddenly every compliment, every apology, every emotional speech fit together like pieces of a puzzle. They weren't trying to protect the family home. They were trying to secure the final signature standing between them and a multi-million-dollar sale. I closed the brochure and slid it back across the desk. You should have told me the truth from the beginning, I said quietly. He stood, frustration replacing confidence. You don't understand what's at stake. No. Iraplia. I understand it perfectly. I just know it's not the lake house. Without another word, he grabbed the brochure and walked toward the door. Just before leaving, he turned back with an expression I'd never seen before. If you refuse this deal, he said, someone else is going to tell you something Grandpa never wanted you to know. The door closed behind him. For the first time since inheriting the property, I wasn't thinking about the house anymore. I was thinking about the secret my grandfather had taken to his grave, and why my family suddenly wanted me to hear it now. The secret they tried to weaponize. The truth loses its power when it's revealed with love. It becomes a weapon only when people save it for the moment it hurts the most. Asterisk, asterisk, my brother's final words echoed through my office long after he had gone. Someone else is going to tell you something Grandpa never wanted you to know. It wasn't just a warning. It was bait. Whoever had been waiting to reveal this so-called secret had chosen the exact moment they believed I was vulnerable. That told me everything. If the truth had been important, they would have shared it years ago. If they were saving it until now, it wasn't meant to help me. It was meant to break me. That evening I drove back to the lake house. The sun was setting over the water, painting the old dock in shades of orange and gold. I unlocked the front door and walked slowly through each room, trying to understand why Grandpa had trusted me with this place when everyone else seemed convinced it should belong to them. His study remained exactly as he had left it. The books still lined the shelves. His reading glasses rested beside an unfinished crossword puzzle. Sitting behind his old desk, I noticed a small brass key taped beneath one of the drawers. I'd never seen it before. Curious, I searched the room until I found a narrow wooden cabinet tucked behind a bookshelf. The key fit perfectly. Inside sat a weathered metal box containing old photographs, property records, and several sealed envelopes tied together with faded blue ribbon. One envelope carried a single instruction written in Grandpa's careful handwriting. Only open this if someone tries to make you doubt why I chose you. My heart pounded as I unfolded the letter. Grandpa admitted he knew disagreements would come after his death. He wrote that people often confuse inheritance with reward, when in reality it is responsibility. Then came the sentence that stopped me cold. Some members of our family will tell you I made a mistake, because they need you to believe it before you discover theirs. I read the words again, slower this time. Grandpa had expected this. He knew pressure would come. He even knew someone would try to use an old family secret against me. But he never explained what that secret was. As I placed the letter back into the envelope, my phone vibrated. The caller ID displayed a name I hadn't seen in nearly 15 years. Margaret Sullivan. My grandfather's former attorney. I answered immediately. Her first sentence made my stomach tighten. Your grandfather asked me to call only if your family ever tried to take that house from you. Because there is one document they never knew existed. The document no one knew existed. Some people hide evidence to protect themselves. Others hide it to protect the people they love. Margaret Sullivan asked if we could meet immediately. Less than an hour later, I walked into her small downtown office, a place that looked almost untouched by time. Shelves filled with old legal books surrounded the room, and framed photographs of grateful clients lined the walls. She greeted me warmly, but I could see the seriousness in her eyes. Without wasting a second, she opened a locked cabinet and carefully removed a thick brown envelope sealed with red wax. Across the front, in my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting, were 6 words. To be opened only if necessary. Margaret gently placed it on the desk. Your grandfather left this with me almost 4 years ago, she explained. He gave very specific instructions. If your inheritance was ever challenged by family pressure, manipulation, or deception, this package belonged to you. For a moment, I simply stared at it. Grandpa hadn't just prepared a will. He had prepared for the storm that would come after it. Inside the envelope were several notarized letters, property records, and a flash drive containing video files. Margaret handed me the first letter. Grandpa explained that he had quietly documented every major discussion about the lake house during the last 2 years of his life. He wrote that several family members repeatedly pressured him to sell the property to a development company. Every time he refused, the conversations became more aggressive. He never mentioned names directly, but one sentence stood out above all the others. Asterisk, the people asking for this house don't want to preserve our family's history. They want to profit from its future. Asterisk, reading those words felt like hearing his voice one last time. Margaret then connected the flash drive to her computer. A video appeared on the screen. Grandpa looked older than I remembered, but his eyes carried the same calm confidence they always had. He smiled gently before speaking. If you're watching this, it means everything happened exactly as I feared. He explained that he loved every member of the family, but love didn't blind him to their choices. He said trust had to be earned through actions, not promises. Looking directly into the camera, he spoke the words I knew I'd never forget. I left the lake house to you because you were the only person who never asked me for it. You loved this place when it had memories, not when it had value. I felt tears forming before the video quietly ended. Margaret closed the laptop and folded her hands. "There's one more thing your grandfather wanted you to know," she said softly. "The development company made another offer 6 months before he passed away. And someone inside your own family secretly agreed to help them convince him." She slid a single document across the desk. My eyes stopped on the signature at the bottom. It wasn't my brother's. It wasn't my mother's. It belonged to the one person I had trusted more than anyone else in the family. And in that moment, everything I believed about my childhood changed forever. The person I never suspected. The deepest betrayals aren't committed by the people you expect. They're committed by the ones you never question. I stared at the signature for what felt like an eternity. It belonged to my Aunt Helen, the same woman who had comforted me after Grandpa's funeral, defended me during family arguments, and repeatedly told everyone she only wanted the family to stay together. According to the agreement in front of me, she had secretly signed a non-binding letter of intent with the development company nearly 7 months before Grandpa passed away. She had no legal authority to do it, but that hadn't stopped her from promising something that was never hers to sell. My stomach tightened. It wasn't the document that hurt the most. It was realizing that every reassuring conversation we'd shared since Grandpa's death had been built on a secret she had chosen to keep. Margaret remained calm as she organized the papers. "Your grandfather discovered this agreement shortly after it was signed," she explained. "The developer believed Helen could eventually convince the family to pressure him into selling." Grandpa never confronted her publicly. Instead, he quietly documented everything and revised several legal instructions to ensure no one could force a sale after his death. He anticipated resistance, but he hoped the family would choose honesty before greed. Sadly, they never did. Margaret then handed me copies of email exchanges between the developer and their legal representative. Reading through them, one sentence immediately caught my attention. "Without Evelyn Carter's signature, this acquisition cannot proceed." There it was in plain black ink. For months, I had been told the property should be shared because it was the fair thing to do. Yet behind closed doors, everyone already knew the truth. I wasn't standing in the way of family harmony. I was standing between a corporation and a deal worth millions. Driving home, I finally understood why everyone had suddenly become so interested in rebuilding our relationship. The invitations, the unexpected phone calls, the emotional speeches, even my mother's homemade pie. None of it had happened by coincidence. Every conversation had been another attempt to move me one step closer to signing away the only obstacle left between them and the developer's money. Oddly enough, that realization didn't make me angry. It made me free. Once you understand someone's real motive, their manipulation loses its power. They could no longer confuse me with guilt because I finally knew exactly what they wanted. The following morning, my phone buzzed with a message from my uncle. "Emergency family meeting. Everyone will be there. We need to settle this today." No explanation. No greeting. Just another demand disguised as urgency. I looked at Grandpa's final letter resting on my desk, folded it carefully, and slipped it into my briefcase. Because this time, I wasn't walking into that house to defend myself. I was walking in with the truth they had spent months trying to bury. And before the day ended, someone in that room was going to admit a lie they could no longer escape. The meeting they thought they could control. The people who rely on lies always believe they can control the room. Until someone arrives with proof instead of opinions. Saturday afternoon, I parked outside the lake house for what felt like the 100th time. Every car was already there. Through the living room windows, I could see my family gathered around the same dining table where they had first placed that agreement in front of me. The moment I walked inside, every conversation stopped. No one smiled this time. There were no hugs, no coffee offers, and no rehearsed welcomes. The kindness had disappeared because they no longer believed it would work. My uncle stood first, cleared his throat, and motioned toward the empty chair waiting for me. "Let's settle this like adults," he said. I calmly took my seat, placing my briefcase beside me without saying a word. They expected another emotional debate. They had no idea I wasn't there to argue anymore. My brother immediately began talking about family unity, financial security, and how selling the property would benefit everyone. My mother quietly repeated that Grandpa would never have wanted the family divided over money. Aunt Helen nodded at every sentence, avoiding my eyes completely. I listened patiently until everyone had finished. Then I opened my briefcase and removed Grandpa's handwritten letter. Without raising my voice, I slid copies across the table. Before anyone speaks again, I said calmly, I'd like everyone to read something Grandpa left behind. The room became silent except for the sound of paper unfolding. Faces slowly changed as they reached the paragraph explaining why Grandpa had chosen only one heir. Then I placed a second document on the table. The letter of intent signed months before Grandpa passed away. This time no one reached for it immediately. They already knew what it contained. They just didn't know I had it. Finally, I looked directly at Aunt Helen. Would you like to explain why you promised Grandpa's property to a developer before he had even passed away? The question landed like thunder. She froze. My brother stared at her in disbelief. My mother looked from Helen to the document, shaking her head as though she were seeing it for the first time. After several unbearable seconds, Helen quietly admitted she had believed Grandpa would eventually change his mind. The developer had convinced her the sale would make everyone wealthy, and she told herself she was acting in the family's best interest. But one compromise became another, and before she realized it, she had started protecting the deal instead of protecting Grandpa's wishes. No one interrupted her confession. No one defended her. For the first time since this nightmare began, the truth was speaking louder than every excuse. Then my uncle slowly pushed back his chair, looked directly at me, and said 6 words that changed everything. There's something else you still don't know. The confession no one expected. Sometimes the most powerful truth isn't hidden in a document. It's hidden in the silence of the person who can no longer live with the lie. My uncle remained standing, his hands resting on the back of his chair. The confidence he had carried into the meeting was gone. He looked around the room before taking a slow breath. There is something all of you deserve to know, he said quietly. Helen wasn't the one who started this. Every face turned toward him. Even Aunt Helen looked confused. For years, my uncle had been the family's problem solver, the one everyone trusted to organize paperwork and keep disagreements under control. No one expected the next words to come from him. The developer contacted me first, he admitted. They knew your grandfather would never sell while he was alive, so they asked me to convince the family that dividing the property was the only fair solution. My mother covered her mouth in disbelief. My brother stared across the table, unable to say a word. My uncle continued without trying to defend himself. He explained that the developer had promised an enormous commission if the sale went through. At first he believed everyone would benefit. But as the property's market value continued to rise, the offer became impossible to ignore. I kept telling myself I was helping the family, he said, his voice breaking. The truth is, I was helping myself. The room fell completely silent. Every emotional speech about unity, fairness, and Grandpa's wishes suddenly made sense. None of it had been about preserving the family. It had been about securing one signature, mine. I reached into my briefcase and placed Grandpa's final video message in the center of the table. Before anyone says another word, I said calmly, I think Grandpa deserves to speak for himself. Margaret had already transferred the recording onto a small tablet. I pressed play. Grandpa appeared on the screen with the same gentle smile I remembered from childhood. He spoke about honesty, responsibility, and the difference between wealth and legacy. Then he looked directly into the camera and said, If anyone tries to convince you that this house is only valuable because of money, they've already forgotten why our family loved it in the first place. Tears quietly rolled down my mother's face. My brother lowered his head. Even my uncle couldn't watch the screen anymore. For the first time no one argued. No one interrupted. Grandpa's voice accomplished what months of family meetings never could. It forced everyone to face the truth. When the video ended, I carefully closed the tablet and stood up. I'm not selling the lake house, I said evenly. Not today. Not next month. Not because I'm stubborn, but because Grandpa trusted me to protect something none of us can rebuild once it's gone. No one challenged my decision. They knew the discussion was over. As I picked up my briefcase, my phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number. This isn't over. If your family won't convince you, we'll find another way. I looked at the screen one last time before slipping the phone into my pocket, because whoever sent that message had just made one very expensive mistake. They had stopped fighting for a piece of land and started threatening the wrong person.